Trokata is a form that is completely frowned upon by Sith and Jedi alike. Why is that, you might ask? Well, let me explain. The classical lightsaber forms focus on different aspects, like using your agility to your advantage, defending attacks, fencing, and other such things. Trokata, though, is more of a trickery or technique than a form, and it's meant to take full advantage of the fact that a lightsaber can be ignited and deactivated rather quickly. The idea is that if you're locked in a saber lock with another wielder, you can quickly shut off your blade in the middle of the fight, reposition your arm, and then reignite it again at the perfect moment. This way, a duelist could bypass an opponent's block by feinting them with this little maneuver, and then strike at them from an angle that the opponent isn't blocking. Furthermore, this mostly unexpected move will likely cause the opponent who's putting power into the saber lock to lose his balance and stumble forward, opening himself up for a quick counterattack. Other ways how it can come in handy is if you just in quick succession strike at them, deactivate the blade, reposition yourself, and then strike again. Or say the user goes to strike at an opponent and just deactivates their lightsaber mid-strike, allowing the weapon to slip past an opponent's guard. Once the blade is past the defense, it's reignited, now on target and nearly impossible to stop. For these reasons, this technique actually could offer a myriad of different advantages in lightsaber combat, as it's a rather unorthodox and counterintuitive thing to just shut off your blade while someone else is attacking you. But if you're a force wielder with precognition as your ally, this might just work out. It was said to be especially effective when paired with Jarkai, the dual-blade fighting style, as you could block with one saber and then use the second one to bypass the opponent's defense and ignite it right in their chest. A second blade also allows to block a counterattack in case the opponent didn't get phased by it, which you can't really do while the blade is deactivated. Most of the time, users of Trokata also just have to be faster than their opponent, and be able to react very quickly, and count on them not reacting or acting surprised. I found this clip from a fellow YouTuber that demonstrates very nicely how Grievous could have used this technique against Obi-Wan in his final fight on Utapau. Funnily enough, it was developed by a Jedi counselor during the Old Republic, which is someone who isn't even really focused on fighting like a Guardian was. It's likely that he used the technique as a last desperate measure to defeat an enemy he was in combat with. However, both the Jedi and the Sith looked down on Trokata, albeit for different reasons. The Sith valued raw power and wanted to feel superior to their opponents. They wanted to be more skillful than their opponent and dominantly cut them down. Trokata went against it, as it was seen as a trick, something a clever or deceitful duelist would use. It was a coward's form in their eyes and a mark of weakness. Thus, Siths didn't really believe in using this form. Meanwhile, the Jedi saw it as unsportsmanlike and dishonest. Their ideals were built on honor and trying to preserve the life of the opponent if at all possible. Using a trick like this just went against the values of the Order, as it would mostly result in the death of the opponent. As a result, the form was rarely taught and almost never openly practiced within the Order. Some Jedi even referred to it as the Forbidden Form. Despite this, though, some Jedi did use this technique, and we even have some very prominent footage of one particular Jedi using it to great success. That Jedi was Master Kausen Durak, who, for those unaware, was the Zabrak Master of Satel Shan we see in the Old Republic cinematic trailers. In that trailer, Satel and himself are the first to witness the return of the Sith Empire, which had disappeared for millennia, and in order to allow Satel to escape and warn the Republic, Durak stays behind and faces off against Darth Malgus and Darth Vindican by himself. By using Trokata, he was actually able to trick-shot and kill Darth Vindican, although he was then bested and killed by Malgus. Still, it was cool to see in some sort of official Star Wars media that Trokata was being used. I guess in the most dire of situations, the Jedi just can't uphold their honors, and do have to resort to forms like these in order to beat an evil like the Sith. Jedi Fallen Order also saw Cal Kestis using the technique to best the second sister during their third fight in order to open her up to a force push. So, yeah, just depends how much you want to follow the code, I guess. Dunmok was less of a lightsaber form, but rather a psychological technique, which was mostly used by Sith during lightsaber combat. It relied on trying to demoralize, distract, or even manipulate their opponents during combat by making taunts and remarks in order to try to make an opponent doubt themselves, and create inner turmoil to weaken their connection to the Force. Users of Dunmok would prey on the fears and doubts that their opponent might have and highlight these to them. This would often be combined with mental force attacks in order to further destabilize an opponent's concentration to the force, which could make them less effective in combat as they're less in tune with the force. However, there are also disadvantages which Darth Sidious, an absolute master of Dunmok himself, had highlighted. Should you provoke the opponent too much, they might give in to their anger and open themselves up to the dark side, which could strengthen them. But then again, a light side user tapping into the dark side could be turned into an advantage if they want to convert them fully to the dark side. That's why this technique and form was often used by the Sith, as they wanted to completely dominate their opponents, physically and mentally, just to show them how superior they were in comparison. So, as you can see, it's a very sinister technique, and it was forbidden for Jedi to use it. But of course, there were always exceptions to these rules. A prominent Jedi that actually used Dunmok to her advantage was Mitra Surik when confronting Darth Sion. As the Sith Lord was basically unkillable, she reverted to taunt him and talk into his doubts in order for him to stop clinging onto life and let go. This eroded his will to live, and he finally became one with the Force. But even in this instance, it's a bit of a difference compared to what someone like Sidious did during his encounters with Luke on the Death Star, where his ultimate goal was to turn him to the dark side by constantly mocking him, killing his friends in front of him, and trying to get him to tap into his anger. Scyto was a lightsaber form which focused on trying to cut the opponent in half. This would usually be at the torso, as seen with Darth Maul, but could also be vertically, as seen with the Seventh Sister that got Maul's lightsaber thrown vertically, most likely slicing her in half from the head down. It was widely frowned upon by the Jedi, as they usually seek to not engage in combat if not necessary, and should all else fail, try to end a battle with as little harm as possible, or if killing them was necessary, do that as fast and painless as possible. Scyto, on the other hand, left the victims of it completely immobilized, but usually they were still alive for some time before succumbing to their injury. Darth Maul most prominently was a victim of this move, and he was in complete anguish, and even lost his sanity due to the pain it caused him. Moay was a finishing lightsaber move that aimed to cut off multiple limbs from an opponent. It targets their major limbs, like legs and arms, with a series of sweeping, circular strikes in order to render the enemy both physically and psychologically destroyed. Due to that, it was favored by Sith quite heavily, as it was the most humiliating way of destroying their opponent. Because of its viscous and ill-intended nature, the Jedi Order forbade its use. In the Jedi's mind, it usually wasn't necessary to cut off multiple limbs, as just cutting off one arm should suffice to neutralize an opponent. Cutting multiple limbs off would be considered butchering an opponent, and making him suffer unnecessarily. Of course, once again, Obi-Wan Kenobi used this move in his ultimate move on Mustafar, as he was left with no choice. He didn't want to kill Anakin outright due to his love for him, but still had to make sure he'd meet his end. The result was that Anakin was left humiliated and mutilated, requiring him to wear the Vader suit just to keep himself alive. Also, because it's so great, let's just watch it together once again, shall we?
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Finally, Form 7 Juyo, despite being recognized by the Jedi, was actually a form that seemed to be entirely made for the Sith. It was often referred to as the Ferocity form, and stood apart mainly due to the users of Form 7 having to channel their emotions like anger and passion to enhance their form. Due to that, it was a very aggressive and vicious lightsaber form, as it focused on trying to hit with as much ferocity as possible in quick succession to try and overwhelm the opponent. Form 7's movements were very wild and unpredictable, making it difficult for opponents to anticipate the practitioner's next move. This form requires a deep connection to the Force, as the user channels their emotions into every strike, turning their inner intensity and anger into physical power. Due to that, the form was mostly forbidden by the Jedi Order due to its corrupting nature. Channeling such emotions like rage and anger would tilt the practitioner too close to the dark side. Most Jedi which had committed to Form 7 as their main form usually did succumb to it, and ultimately fell to the dark side. Thus, the form was heavily favored by Sith and Dark Jedi. Darth Sidious and Darth Maul were both known to have used Form 7 a lot, and to have favored it, despite also being proficient in all the other forms. Galen Marek, who eventually turned back to the light, was also a known Juyo practitioner. The only way that Jedi were able to use Form 7 without succumbing to the dark side was with the form that Mace Windu created called Vapad. This form was very unique, but also incredibly difficult to master and required its wielder to be at complete peace with himself, described as a state of mind. Vapad allowed its user to draw on their inner darkness and also channel the rage of their opponent to refuel their own energy, and channel it to increase their own in a loop. This made Vapad especially effective against dark side practitioners, as a practitioner of Vapad could use the dark side energy to fuel themselves. Still though, its users were walking a very thin line between the light and dark side, and only the best of the Order like Mace Windu didn't succumb to it. For reference, Sora Bulk, the Jedi that co-created the form alongside Windu, did eventually succumb to the dark side. That's why it was mostly not encouraged by the Jedi and was also eventually banned from being used. And that's it, all the lightsaber forms and techniques that were forbidden by the Jedi. Please like and subscribe.